Well, welcome. We're glad that you came.
Was there a specific question?
No, just to
okay.
introduce yourselves.
Okay, perfect.
So Donna, again, thank you for coming to speak today, and I'll let you take
Okay,
over.
thank you. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Whenever I present, I stand, so I'm going to stand. Otherwise, I have the wrong hat on. So it's a pleasure to start and share a little bit about my entrepreneurial journey. My career has 3 legs to it, or 3 income streams. And so if you go to my website, this is my home screen. And so I do a fair amount of performing. And the middle leg is residencies. And the one that is most popular is Music on the Trail, which is the Oregon Trail experience and music that was experienced and what life was like as folks crossed the Oregon Trail. The beauty of that one is it really hits 4th grade Nebraska state standards in history, and so that is a nice hook to have the teachers open their ears and be open to bringing that in. And then I have the Piano Place is my piano studio that I've operated since 1987. Speaking of doing the math on how many years someone's been at something. So that's my home screen, and those are the 3 things that I focus on. And then inside that screen, you can do a lot of deep diving. Everything, there are, back on the home screen, all of the blue are links, and of course up at the top, those are all links. I have a book that I'll be talking about in a little bit down in the bottom right corner. So everything you click on, there's a nice deep dive into the website. Likewise, that is, if you click on Music on the Trail, then that gives you a little bit more of information about it. If you do a Google search for piano lessons near me, this is what you will see. So I try to hit my market in a variety of ways so that however they're looking for something, I'm somebody that they look at. And so that is just a nice little brief inside look at my piano studio, which is the lower level of my bungalow home. And so it's a perfect setup for me because, yes, my business is in my home, but it's, as you can tell, I have egress windows, so it's not really in the basement. Yet at the same time, there's a lot of nice separation. So my private life is here and my work life is here.
So you have 3 pianos down there?
I do.
Oh, wow.
When I've lived, Steinway? That is the Steinway. Yes, it was built in 1939 originally, and I've had it rebuilt. I'm only the 2nd owner, so it's a pretty. Afterward, if you want, or if we have time at the end, I can tell you the really cool story of how serendipity can just plop right a beautiful Steinway grand. And same thing with this, with my home. I've been there for 8 years, and I was looking and looking for the right place. There was a lot of life changes happening. And I was getting pretty discouraged based on what I could afford and what was out there, everything from red shag to big poles. And one Sunday afternoon, I was getting ready to go to a meeting, and I had some time, and I just drove in the neighborhood where that meeting was, and I found this house. And it was a for sale by owner, and there was a sign, and I pulled up, and I called the number and asked if I could look at their house, and he goes, "Sure, when?" I'm like, "Now?" And I went in, and this is when you go down the stairs, that's a stage. You go down the stairs and you turn right, and the Steinway is actually on a stage.
Oh, wow.
So
it's a house built for you.
It was, yeah. So that's what you see, and yes, and that's the beauty of it is when people think about having their child take piano lessons, there's still that stereotype of the little old lady who has her piano in her living room with 3 cats and all of that stuff. And so when they come into my studio, they see that it is a classroom. You can see the bulletin board there. There's a timeline, a musical timeline. So they're really getting a music education for their child, not just lessons on the side. So how did I get there? I had to ask myself lots of questions. As I said, I've operated my piano studio since 1987, but how did those other things come about? So lots and lots of questions. The most important one for me was, what am I passionate about? If I'm going to be self-employed and I'm going to be putting in all of this extra time and energy, and as a self-employed musician, the pay grade is not huge, and so I want to make sure that I'm doing something that I'm passionate about. So is it something I'm having fun doing? Do I get wrapped up in what I'm doing? We were talking beforehand about I'll be working and all of a sudden have a headache. Well, it's because I've been engrossed in it for 2 hours. That's a good sign. If I'm working on something because I'm so wrapped up in it that I can't pull myself away. And then is what I'm doing today giving me one step toward maybe what I want to be doing tomorrow? So those are some questions I had to ask myself. And so for me, passion, what I have a lot of fun doing, I love to perform. And performing gigs are things that also I can give back to. I do a lot of performing in senior communities that allows them to continue to be intellectually and emotionally and spiritually engaged through a professional level performance. Recently I gave a performance and afterward, well, just this last week, it was for Veterans Day, and it was a Veterans Day performance, and I acknowledge and offer everyone the opportunity to share their experience as a veteran or a loved one who served as a veteran, and then we sing the anthem of each branch of the government. And as I was packing up and leaving, I heard these two gentlemen talking more about what they had done. And I thought, oh, I have served my purpose, that as I leave, they're still engaged in what I brought to them. What I get excited about is creativity and sharing my creativity. All of my programs have been self-designed based on what I think the population's needs are. And I get really excited. I just recently did a program that I designed that it's a senior community that in November she contacted me and said, I want you every month next year. Okay, well I have 8 programs. And so she said, well, and so we got it all kind of figured out except for October. And I said, well, let me think on it. And then as I was thinking about October, I was thinking, well, what happens in October? Well, in Nebraska, the colors change. And so I designed the color of music and how musicians think about colors and how we as listeners can think about colors. And then I perform things that really focus on that, and then I take it a little bit more abstractly beyond that. And so I get really excited about being able to develop new programs. Another part of the Music on the Trail is I'm hooked in with the Nebraska Arts Council. And so I get to bring those programs into the schools, and it's convincing teachers that first time to give me a try that if you will, look at how you develop and produce and implement your curriculum with your students can be done in a different way, that I guarantee you through this way I'll still hit your curriculum points, but we'll be doing it instead of open your history book to page such and such, or we're going to watch another video, which those are all great, but it's nice to have other opportunities. And I have been at Prescott, this is my 11th year that they've had me back. And so oftentimes for some schools they can keep having me back. There are some parameters that they have to work within. But so I get excited about being able to share my passion creatively. And then, what do I get wrapped in? What am I having fun? I have the gift of curiosity. My daughter and I oftentimes will joke about, I'll see something and then I went down that rabbit hole and 30 minutes later, but it's just because I'm curious, and that's great. I've even been dubbed the Queen of Questions, so watch out. So another question I had to ask myself, or areas in which I had to explore for myself, is what do I consider success? And so the book by Jeff Colvin, Talent is Overrated, which is a great one for a musician, because in the musical world, we really see that top 1%. And then everything else is kind of other. And I don't know about your disciplines, but that's what I experienced in my discipline. And so, just because I'm not being asked to perform on center stage at the Leeds Center or Carnegie Hall or, each of those places. By the way, anybody can play at Carnegie Hall. You just pay your fee. So what Jeff really helped me understand is all of those keys to successes, which some already overlap with what I've said, but high standards and expectations. They're not going to hire me to come out in the school if I don't have my ducks in a row and know what I'm talking about. Passion, I just spent a lot of time. Believing in myself. This is one of my favorite ones as an entrepreneur. Nobody will care more about my work than me. That has been really important for me to remember. Absolutely work smart. Know the things that I can't do and be willing to do the research on this is what I know about, this is what I don't know about, who do I know that does know about that, and I can ask them for help. Be creative and flexible. Oftentimes when I reach out to possible presenters, I ask them, what are you looking for? How can I meet your needs? And then there are sometimes like, oh, well, I can't. And that's okay. I can't be everything to everyone. And if I try to do that, nobody's happy. Be prepared to work hard, perseverance, sticking with the winners. That's one of the reasons why I started coming here, is sticking with others who have that like-minded viewpoint in their career, finding balance, and then giving back. And he says that's what he noticed through his study. And so those are things that I really wanted to spend some time with and develop. Another thing that helped me to get where I am is I spent several years with Jill Timmons. She is an entrepreneur herself, and she was a professor at, I can't remember the name of the college on the West Coast for 25 years, and then she developed her own consulting firm. And so she and I had worked together probably 3 years before we ever met face to face. And that was even before the time of FaceTime and Zoom, and so it was just phone conversations. And in her book, The Musician's Journey, she talks about these are the things that musicians oftentimes tell ourselves why we can't succeed in what we want to do. Making excuses, I give up, this is hard. I love that one, this is hard. I can't, unrealistic expectations. A big one that I think musicians deal with, again with that all or nothing, is I'm not good enough, or it's never been done. I was just telling a piano student last week that music is one of the few disciplines where the expectation really is 100%. Like if you're playing baseball and you hit 300, you're awesome. And so we kind of unpacked that a little bit, and she's like, oh, that's right. I said, now that doesn't let you off the hook. You still have to play all the B flats. But it helps, it gives us permission to be a little more human, I think. So dealing with those issues really helped me as well. And I took almost all of Jill's advice. So this is my Music on the Trail gig. That trunk was my great-great-grandfather's that they brought from Germany. And it was actually full of sand and potatoes because they were afraid there weren't going to be potatoes here. And so Jill at first, so the one advice I didn't take was, one of these things is not like the other, right? Look at that top left picture. So if you know me, you'll know that is not me. And so I got to develop some understanding about, I still get to be true to myself. And so I took her advice and I bought the red boots and went to Fort Western, and I just walked in and I said, I need something for on stage. And this 20-something girl had so much fun decking me out. And so the skirt literally comes to here. And I'm like, well, we need to do something with this. And so then we got the leggings, and so I'm okay with that. So it's a lot of fun. And for me, I'm a pretty conservative dress person, and so that took some believing in myself. But I'll tell you, as I get a little bit further in some of the other things, those red boots have been my trademark. They've turned into my trademark. And actually, I was at a national conference and was given, out of the hundreds and hundreds of people, and this was when it was online, they offered a free consultation, but it was going to be online and everybody was going to watch. And so, and I thought, you know what? I'm just going to throw myself out there. I don't know any of these people anyway. They're from all over the country. And they took me up on it, and one of the things they commented on was the red boots. Like, okay. So let's see. Catch up with here. Well, most of it. All right. So yeah, curiosity, keep growing is part of why I'm here. I was starting to feel pretty isolated in my career, and in the Music Teachers Association, didn't feel like there was a connection between some of the other teachers as entrepreneurs. And so a friend of mine who has developed another career stream later in her life, she said that she was doing something through the university. And so I said, well, and I just looked and contacted Amy and we connected. And so it's that never quit learning, never quit reaching out. So trusting the process, being fluid and in flux. Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a little slide from my Music on the Trail program. So this is Ezra Meeker. He crossed the Oregon Trail in 1852 when he was 22 years old with his wife and 7-week-old child. Let that sink in, crossing the Oregon Trail with a 7-week-old child. And got all the way to Oregon and then retraced the trail several times, not all the way, but would go back part way and meet friends and family and help them finish. And then on the top left, at the age of 72, he was afraid that we would forget this part of our history, and he retraced the trail all the way back to Washington, D.C., and met with the president. And because of that, the president was Teddy Roosevelt, who has a vested interest, right, very interested in our parks. And Teddy Roosevelt then went to Congress and asked them, and they allocated $20,000 to mark the Oregon Trail. So when you go and you see those landmarks, it's because of Ezra Meeker, which is about $8 million in today's money. So he did that at 70, and then he retraced it again in his 80s on the bottom left in a car. And then in his 90s, he took a biplane trip. He's in the front seat there.
That's a Stearman.
Okay. And so what that tells me is just keep trying new things, right? Find my passion and just keep going for it. And I'm sure that when Ezra retraced the trail back to DC, he didn't expect to meet Teddy Roosevelt, let alone have $20,000 allocated. He just did it because he felt a calling to do it. So, find people that I admire. I keep doing that, and that helps spur me on. When I was first developing those 2 other streams and was feeling a little burned out with my studio, I had 4 songs on my MP3 player that I ran with every morning, and they gave me inspiration. The first one is by Smetana, and it's called The Moldau. And it's just this beautiful orchestral piece that when you're out running, and this morning I ran with it again, and it took me back to one of the places I used it a lot was when I was doing some study in Hungary. And so when I turn that on a nice cool morning like this, I'm just transported back to Hungary running on those trails. And then Audra McDonald, if you know of the Broadway singer Audrey McDonald, you might have seen her as the mother, whatever, it was the TV version of The Sound of Music. So she was the Mother Superior. And her rendition of Climb Every Mountain is just incredibly moving. And she has 2 other pieces that I love. One is called First You Dream. And then the other one, to make me love myself and think I'm really amazing, is Wonderful You. And so, I just need those kind of perks to help me throughout. And it can be anything that I might be just having kind of a down day, or I wake up thinking, oh, it's Monday. And, you know, I get dressed and get my running clothes on and get out there and I start listening to that. I'm like, oh, it's actually a pretty amazing day. So I try to be hooked into those positive inspirations. So some of my biggest successes, I already talked about the color of music. So on the top right, there's also, that's a really cool interpretation of, anybody know who that composer is? You might not even recognize him, but that's Beethoven. And the lead center had whatever anniversary it was, and they commissioned this work. And the reason one of my big successes was during the pandemic. So the pandemic started to hit like in January and February of that year. And that year I had more gigs booked than I ever had had. And the phone just started ringing and it just all disappeared. So I could have sat in my little house for 2 years and felt sorry for myself, or I needed something to perk me up. And so I went to Beethoven because there's a lot of humor in his music. So I found some pieces and I kind of pieced together 3 different movements. And then the pandemic was still going on. And so I checked out several books about him. And I got to know Beethoven the person more so than Beethoven the composer. And so the title of that program is The Benevolent Beethoven, because he was incredibly benevolent. And so I've had the opportunities to develop some fun programs. Then on the left side, that's my studio on the top. That was this last summer, we went on a beach party. And so I look at those kids, and because I've had some really good success of getting good fits with my students, a lot of my students start in 2nd grade and they stay with me and I see them graduate high school and beyond. And so those tall kids in the back, they remember being the little kids, and now they're the assistant directors of piano camp. And then I've talked about Music on the Trail. This little guy on the right, in that little square on the left, with the little red kerchief on, so he's wearing, yes, he has an apron on, which is what I hired somebody to make some aprons. So he's wearing an apron and a vest, and then instead of the kerchief, like you would wear the kerchief, he has it over his head. And he, you know, I mean, he's one of my role models. It's like, he feels pretty good about himself, that he's, but so those are some great successes. And I talked about with the red boots that ended up being one of my, my logo when I take my Music on the Trail marketing out. My studio, the grand piano, represents that, and the ability to make a living doing what I love, and as much time as I get to spend at the piano on a daily basis. That's a huge success. That's a huge gift. And then that curiosity. So that is the School of Music at the University Library, and that's the book I wrote. So I mentioned that I was in Hungary. So in 2008, the University of Nebraska had a guest lecturer through the Norman Gaskey lecture series, and it was he would consider himself a forte pianist, and asked me afterward if you want to know more. It's a period instrument, and so it's a niche understanding of the music of Beethoven, Haydn, and Mozart, and the instrument on which they played, how they heard their music based off of that instrument, and how they wrote their music. And it answered all of these questions I had had. It was like, oh my gosh, it makes sense. And so that was in 2008, and I had an entrepreneur friend, colleague, that she was the professor that brought him to the university, and so we developed a relationship, and she took me out to lunch one day and she goes, you know, you're really into this. There's this thing going on in Holland. At the time they hadn't changed to the Netherlands. She goes, there's this thing going on in Holland, and it's called the Art of the Forte Piano. And you won't be the best pianist there, but you won't be the worst. And you would learn something. And she goes, and even if you don't learn anything, it's a good vacation. So I went. And at the last recital, it was a week-long workshop, and she was right. I wasn't the worst and I wasn't the best, and that's a good place to be. But I'm a really good educator. And at that last recital, as we're waiting to go in, I turned to her and I go, you know, somebody should write a book about this so that it's easier so when piano teachers try to teach this. So Ann said, well, so write it. So I did. And it took several years, but it ended up culminating. And Jill Timmons, the consultant that I mentioned that I worked with, so I do not have a PhD. I don't have a doctorate in musical arts. And so one of the can'ts is, well, you can't do that. Nobody's going to want to publish you. You don't have the right letters behind your name. And Jill's like, well, why can't you? And Jill had already published The Musician's Journey. And so she gave me, you know, if you'll do this and this and this and this, and that I did, every step, exactly what she said. And it ended up being picked up by a small publishing firm. And so then I reached out to the other 12 publishing firms that I had submitted, and Oxford University Press was interested, which is the A game of the A game. And so I learned so much in that process. And you know, doing the right thing without a guarantee of an outcome is something I have learned to accept. But as I started working with Oxford, Tim was the publisher at the time that I worked with, and he contacted me. He said, "We're interested, but I'd submitted it in outline form." And he said, "We're interested, but we'd like you to write a chapter." And he goes, "And we can't guarantee that we're going to sign you by then, but we can guarantee you that your work will get better." So I wrote a chapter, and we talked about it, and I learned a great deal. And he goes, "We'd like you to write one more." I was like, "Come on, you guys." And I'm like, and so somebody asked me, "What are you going to do?" I'm like, "Oxford wants me to write another chapter. I'm going to do it." and then they signed me, and they've been amazing to work with and super supportive. So those are my big successes that I would say, and that's a lot of successes. I feel very grateful for all the things I've been able to do. And I've had some failures that led me to better successes. So I mentioned the booking conference, where this is before it went online. So I don't know if you've ever been to like a trade show, right? So it's like a trade show for musicians. So there's my little booth and my stuff, and you can even see the booth beside me and the booth to each side. So you're in this tiny little place with, 500 of your best friends, and then presenters just walk through and they decide whether they want to stop and talk with you or not. And I told myself I would do it for 5 years and see what would happen. Well, I did it for 4, and at the end of 4 years I realized I had gotten everything I could out of it, and I had given it my all. I thought that I would at least get a booking through those. I never got a single booking. But I learned certainly how to talk about myself quickly. I learned definitely how to have some pretty thick skin, that just because they don't hire me doesn't mean that there's something wrong with me. It just means that my work in that arena is not a good fit. And so the bottom right are the personal letters that I hand signed to, I think there were like 80 people, 80 businesses. And so I gave it my all. And on paper, it might say it's a failure because I didn't get a single booking, but it led me to develop great appreciation for what I do bring to the arena. Okay, there we go. And it all began here, so now we're working backwards. So I grew up liking music a lot and found I was pretty good at it. I do have a bachelor's degree in music ed, which my professor, as a freshman, and of course as an 18-year-old, you certainly think you know everything, and I was very good at my high school as a pianist and a singer, and so I had a very inflated opinion of my abilities. That was it. And I was a little arrogant. I don't know if you know of any 18-year-olds who might be arrogant. And so my professor very lovingly said, you know, that might work, but you might want to be able to pay for groceries. Let's maybe get that BME while you're at it. Which then now, with all of the residencies I take into the schools, it has served me incredibly well. So, I mean, this is being recorded on Zoom. You can go back to YouTube and read it all. I think I'm really interesting, and I'd love to read all of it to you, but I want to leave some time for questions and answers. What I do like is, second to the bottom, I have been able to evolve to include much more in my life than I ever could have dreamed of. I'm so grateful for where I am in my career and in my life. Okay, and that's it, I guess. So if I had a major piece of advice, I think that you've probably heard it over and over throughout my presentation. Find out what it is that you love or you're passionate about. And then for me, it was to find a way to make a living at it. I actually did have the opportunity. I worked in the public schools twice with my Bachelor of Music Education. My first gig was at Bennett Elementary, and I was vocal and instrumental K through 6. And I really did like that job, really quite a lot. And then I was offered an opportunity to get my master's degree with a stipend and an assistantship, so I took it. And then I thought, well, I don't know, I really like teaching privately, but gosh, so I applied with Lincoln Public Schools and got a job there as well. And I was about 3 weeks in, and I realized I really hated doing this. And I finished the year, and I think I did a decent job. But I realized that that's not where I had my passion. I have great appreciation for the other teachers who teach BME, but that was just not for me. So find what I love and make a living at it. If I had stayed in the public schools, I could be retired now with a full pension and all of those things. And I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't have been a happy person. I wouldn't have done anybody a good service. And so, as a self-employed person, it's all a trade-off. I'm going to go and visit my family next week, and I'm leaving on Tuesday instead of Wednesday after work. And I'm going out on the 20th in December instead of the 24th. So that's that balance piece that I talk about. A minor piece of advice is maybe one of the things I wish I had known about or had listened to, I'm sure it was there, was to take some kind of business courses to help me to be a little bit more efficient in how I do accounts receivable and my revenue streams and that kind of thing. But I figured it out. Some of it like in the last 2 years, but you know what? I figured it out. Some people never do. And then the last important question I ask myself frequently is, I'm given 24 hours today. How do I want to spend it? And then one of the other questions that I've heard asked is, what are some local entrepreneurs that I frequent? And so I've been doing a little thinking. So I like to go to the Hub. It's a little restaurant off of, I don't know, the Big Head.
The bike trail.
Yeah. Where the Big Head is. Akela Jewelers at 33rd and Pioneers. I actually bought this there, by the way. And her wedding ring.
Great place.
Yes. When my son-in-law, I'm very blessed to have a good relationship with my son-in-law, and he was going to propose. And he knew his budget, and I said, well, let's go to Akela. And so we walked in, and David was just great. He's like, well, let's try this and let's try, yeah. So I love Akela. Ollie's Shoe Repair. They fixed this, and I had a pair of hiking boots that I was like in Yosemite at the top of this trail, and looked down, and like half of my hiking boot, like, well, I hope I can make it down. But Ollie's, they have 2 incredible puppy dogs that are so much fun to say hi to, and their work is amazing. Piedmont Bistro, Leon's. I kind of forgot about Leon's, and I'm within walking distance. I go there all the time. Zesto, 5-Star Carpet and Floor Care. Kevin does a great job. Anderson's Body Shop does a great job. I had the booking conference I was talking about. The very first one I went to, so I was really new into this, and every penny, I was like counting every single penny. I thought I had a really good conference. I was really excited. I got loaded up, got in the car, and my car has it turns on a dime, and I went to back out, and I backed into one of the pillars on the side. So I didn't want to, and so it was an old car, and I didn't have collision. So I went to one of the companies, and they said, well, you know, since you're not going to be using your insurance, this is who we recommend. And so he did a great job. So they're up on like North Superior, off of North Superior. Sometimes we don't think of Russ's and Super Saver and Union Bank and Trust as like small entrepreneurs, but I mean, I remember when Russ's was food for less, and it was a single little, right? And so it has grown, and I still patronize Russ's and Super Saver. Those are all locally owned. Same thing with Union Bank and Trust. I mean, I remember when 48th and Calvert was Union, that was it. And my children live in Colorado Springs, and they bank with Union Bank and Trust because you can do all of your deposits mobile, you know, everything's done online. So that's my shtick.
But who moved your pianos?
Oh my gosh! Chet's transfer.
You've been patiently waiting.
Oh, I need to go back. Yes, Chet's is amazing. In my house, so when I bought the house, before I bought the house, I called my carpenter, and I would put him on as well, but he's retired. So I called Tom and I said, so I'm thinking about buying this house, but the stairwell, the house is built in 28. So I had to duck to go downstairs. And then, you know, you duck and you go down, and then there's this stage and everything. And so I called Tom, I said, come and look. I said, if that's not a load bearing, can we take this wall out? I said, I don't care how we get it out. I just want to get it in there. My daughter can deal someday with how to get rid of this piano. But, so he cuts it, and he measures the piano, and he cuts it, and it's all decided. So Chess is moving that day. It was January 31st, and it was warm, or the 29th, something like that. And they start to take the piano down. They go, it's not going to fit. And when you move a grand, you take the legs off and you put it on its side. Okay. So they go, it's not going to fit. I'm like, are you kidding me? So I call Tom. I can still see myself standing in the stairwell. And I'm like, so Tom, we have a bit of an emergency here. Chet says that it won't fit. Well, what Tom didn't measure was the dolly.
Details.
I know. So, but Tom is great. He goes, tell him to just wait. He came right over. He gets out the saw and cuts more of the, and Chess was great. They said, we'll just take the piano back to the warehouse tonight and we'll bring it back tomorrow. But the other funny thing in my house is it's a bungalow from the 20s before refrigerators were a thing. So you walk into the kitchen, and then there's all the kitchen, and then you go down the stairs, and there's this little platform where the ice box used to sit, which is where the refrigerator now goes. So they have to like lift the refrigerator on the stairs and fit it in. And when I bought a new refrigerator, they came and they're like, we remember you. But Chess, they do a great job of giving back to the community. They do, for Lincoln Music Teachers Association, they've moved some pianos for families of limited means. Actually, I have a piano student who has a piano that Chet's gave him. Like, he had picked it up when they had done some moving that people didn't want it, and they just had it in their warehouse. And I have a family that they're refugees from Myanmar, and the children take piano, and so, yeah. So, yes, my piano mover, thank you. Oh my gosh. So do you have any questions or comments? Or
Where did you go to college?
University of Nebraska, Lincoln. Studied with Auden Ravnan, if you are into music at all. He received several statewide awards for his performing in Nebraska. He very easily could have just stayed in Lincoln and done the big performing things, but he would take performances out to Scottsbluff and all these small towns. So whenever I whined about how one of the pianos I didn't like at the School of Music, he's like, you know, the good sign of a good pianist is they can take whatever instrument they have and make it sound like a grand. I'm like, and I couldn't argue with him because he did that. Yes.
So, Queen of Questions, right, and a lifelong learner. How does that apply to you now? Like, what questions are you asking yourself for their next step?
Well, another role model is Leslie Odom Jr. He played Aaron Burr in Hamilton. He is an amazing jazz musician. I should have his book up. It's called Failing Up. And it's really funny. So Hamilton happened and all of these successes, and he also performed an amazing song after a presidential election that Sarah Bareilles wrote called, I can't remember it. If you do Leslie Odom Jr. and Sarah Bareilles on YouTube, Google it and it will come up. And so he turned 30, he'd had all these successes, and he was asking himself, what next? And I thought, well, I have a crush on Leslie Odom Jr. I know I'm a little old for that. It's not a creepy crush. Like, I don't write to him or anything. And so if Leslie wrote it, and so it's wonderful. And as I was reading through it, I was like, okay, so Leslie is going into 30. He's going into like the middle stage of his career, and I'm at the third stage of my career. And there were so many parallels about, like, am I touching lives? Am I doing what I love? And I am. I'm touching lives. I'm doing what I love. And I'm still learning that color, the color of music. I premiered it like 2 months ago. And so I'm getting toward where I'm thinking about retirement, but I don't know that musicians ever actually retire. One of my mentors, Malcolm Bilson, I'm still in touch with him with my book project. And during the pandemic, he was living in an assisted living facility. His wife has some other health issues. And he taught himself how to like edit and paste and all of this stuff on Zoom and all of these videos he made. And so that's my role model. Is like, I think I still have much to offer to myself and to my community.
You don't retire, you repurpose.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
And that book by Leslie is just amazing.
Add that to our book club.
I just texted
Did you?
it to you.
Yeah.
To remember.
It's a real easy read. And you know, we always think of, I have a colleague that she's impressed with the performing I do out in all the gigs, and she's like, that's just so amazing. How do you do that? I'm like, well, it took about 10 years for me to develop the relationships that I have, that, you know, I can reach out to several communities and they're like, yeah, we want you this month, and this month. But that isn't what it was like the first 3 or 4 years. And that booking conference taught me about cold calling. Yeah, that it's okay to do that.
Do you interact with local community colleges and high schools in terms of either doing opportunities or workshops with them, or?
I have.
Okay.
I have done a presentation for all of the fourth graders in Lincoln Public, fourth grade teachers in Lincoln Public Schools. They have, I don't know, departmental meetings. And so the departmental consultant was interested in my work, and I went and I did a presentation about music on the trail and and I got this much feedback. And Malcolm taught me this, is you do it because it's the right thing to do, not because what you're going to get out of it. Because what makes me crazy is the Nebraska Arts Council post-pandemic, there's not even a funding match. So they hire me for a 20-hour residency for $0. If I have to travel, then the schools have to pay like a per diem and put me up. But so you can hire me in Lincoln Public Schools And I can come and do a 20-hour workshop or even a 10-hour workshop residency in your school, and it costs you nothing. The Arts Council pays me. And so I can go crazy and keep trying to make those LPS people like me, or I can go to Prescott, who's had me for 10 years, and Blessed Sacrament, who's had me for 3 years. And yeah, a good friend of mine is like, yeah, what I do, it's not for everyone. Like, oh, right, don't take myself so seriously. Yeah, it's just not for everyone. Or I can go crazy about it. Yeah.
You're doing amazing, and the legacy that you're creating
thank you.
is huge.
Thank
so
you.
I have a question more on, like, you have one daughter?
I do.
Okay. What do you feel like, because we are entrepreneurs, what do you feel like, how do you think she sees your entrepreneurial journey? Like, what's the impact do you think it's had on her in her life?
Oh my gosh, I think a pretty big one. And I also have a son who died 10 years ago, and so he, at 22, he was actually one of my biggest cheerleaders. Before I went to Holland, he was playing baseball, summer ball, and I'm like, oh, I don't know, I'm gonna miss a bunch of your games. It's like, Mom, we play like 70 games. It's okay, go, you know, and so, so I think that for both of them, they saw and see, I mean, as they were graduating high school, it's like, what do you love? And so my daughter went into aerospace engineering. She landed a nice scholarship and was at Iowa State. And after the first year, I could tell that that was really not for her. And I kept my mouth shut because she needed to find out for herself. She stuck it out for another year, bless her heart. And then at the end of that second year, she was like, she had wanted to do that her whole life. I mean, she just had her heart set on being an Aero E. And that was the year that President Obama was elected, that election cycle. And she's like, I don't know what I would do. And I said, really? So how many of your other students have a map of the United States on their dorm room wall with red and blue states figured out? So then she went into political science. But so it was that same idea of, what am I passionate about? How can I, what do I do with my passion? And she ended up with a bachelor's degree in political science with a minor in music and a minor in math because she had done enough math for Aero E. And if she would have stayed for one more semester, she would have had a minor in German. She's like, I just want to graduate. I'm like, yes, of course. And then she worked 2 years in that field and didn't know she was ready to move on. And I said, well, go take one grad class in political science. And so she did, and it wasn't a good fit. And so, long story short, she ended up feeling the call to ministry. So she's an Episcopal priest. And so for women, and the beauty of it is she talks about how many people open doors for her and how she now can open doors for any people or any gender, but for women as well. So for instance, she's getting ready to move on and they're done having children. And when she negotiates her next contract, she's going to make sure that there is a good maternity leave contract clause in that. She goes, it won't help me. I'm not going to have any more babies. But somebody else coming along, whether it's male or female, should have a maternity clause. Yeah. Does that answer?
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Just to think about, like, you can see the legacy with your students and all of that, but I can see, like, the first story you told about how you finished the semester. She did the same thing with aerospace engineering. She went through and she did it. And so she's seen that with you, like, go through all these different phases. And so beautiful. Because I have 2 little ones. I have a 9 and 11-year-old, so I'm always thinking about that too.
Yeah, oh, they pay attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to say anything. It's what we do that they see. And there are so many of those things. One of the beautiful things is with our relationship, with my writing skills that I developed through Oxford. So before she sends her sermons to me, and I take a look at it, and there are so many times that she remembers some things that Mom showed her as growing up, like, and tears of gratitude that yeah. Yes.
So you've been teaching for a while. I'm curious, especially since you're doing that sort of the creative mind part, if you've noticed the difference in your students, like posts, like social media in a lot of the computers compared to like your students in the TVs.
Oh, it's
Or if it has had any effect at all.
well, from a teaching aspect, it's beautiful. Which reminds me, I need to send a link to a student that I promised yesterday. Is that I can, like when I talk about, one of the songs is Volga Boatman in a primer piece, and so I asked them, what's the Volga? And they don't know. And so I can offer them that bulletin board you saw. It's an incentive board, and so they can get points if they can come back and tell me. Well, they don't have to go to the library and get a book on Russian history. They can just Google the Volga. And I can send them links. With that song, I can send them a link of the Red Russian Army male chorus singing that, and not Benny Goodman, Glenn Miller's orchestra playing a jazz version of it. And so that component has really helped me as a teacher. I think on a very fundamental level, one of the differences I see is those of you of my generation remember what copy and paste really meant. And if you made a mistake, you had to roll the typewriter carefully and erase and then realign it. So I typed a lot differently then than I do now, because I can just hit delete, right? And so with piano students, the idea of thinking before they play versus playing and making mistakes and fixing, that's a difference. I think the biggest difference between the 80s and today is when in the 80s, there were not the plethora of activities. That's my biggest. I don't see my students getting as far, like where my students were at 6th grade in the 80s versus where they are at 6th grade today. There's a difference, because they have more things to do.
How's their dedication today? I did a lot of reading about the Z generations and a lot of that. Just understanding what work ethic is, I guess that's better.
Yeah. Well,
Is that a challenge?
I'm laughing at me. I mean, because if you study with me, you're going to get that. Like I just had, and I mean, I never want to send a child out in tears. That's not my intention. But there was a little girl that twice this week. Maybe I need a vacation. But there was a little girl who had not prepared. And I just said, Maddie, that's just not like you. I'm sorry, but I taught it to you twice now, and you still haven't done it. So whose responsibility is it to do it? And mine. And I email parents after every lesson, like this was, and Mom said she was crying. And I said, well, I'm sorry about that. And so I wrote her a little note, and it's in the mail. But I think work ethic is there. I mean, that's on me. If my students don't know what a work ethic is, then that's on me, that I'm not saying, when you study with me, and I am at the high end of what people pay for private piano lessons. And so they're paying a lot of money, and if you study with me, this is what you get. And if you, on the flip side, when they do something well, I'm their biggest cheerleader. Like, wow, that was amazing. So I try to stay away with, my daughter had a high school teacher, and he was great. He said, if I ever start thinking kids today, I need to retire, because that's information about me.
That's great. Yeah, that is.
Because kids are kids.
Yeah.
And everybody comes with, I mean, my granddaughter, they have to practice, they're practicing for a shooter, right? So in her preschool, they have to practice hiding and lights out and like that. And I mean, I remember practicing for duck and cover during the Cold War, which was another practice in illusion, like, but anyway. And so every generation has their struggles and their challenges and their things that make life easier. And so my job is to see where are they and how do I inspire them and how do I light a fire under them and sometimes kick them in the butt. And then when they come back, I can say, you know, last week was really rough and look at what you've done. This is amazing. So that was a very long answer to your very quick question. Don't get me started on music ed.
Well, it's like that setting higher standards, like you said at the beginning, you know, that's the standard of coming to work with you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that, I mean, in the 40 years I've taught, I've had 2 students major in music, I think. I mean, I don't even keep track. I don't care. I mean, what I want is, and one of the things I tell kids as they're entering high school and deciding whether they want to continue piano or not is I'm like, I get how much you love soccer, and I want you to do that in high school. I just don't want you to drop piano. So let's find a way for you to keep that, because when you're 35, you're probably not going to go out and play soccer, but you might want to sit down and play the piano. So I have high standards, but I keep, yeah. If you're playing 8 measures, it better be 8 great measures.
So talking about soccer and extracurricular activities with other things that kids can be doing, like how do you talk with the parents about including that with their busy schedules? Because I do music myself, and
Right.
I'm super interested in just being able to work with parents on like multi-specializing in things.
Well, when they start, it's very clear that this is your practice expectation.
Sure.
I mean, yeah, I mean, yeah, if it's 6 days a week, beginners is 20 minutes a day, 6 days a week. Yeah, that's just, yeah, and then second year, 25 minutes. By the time you're in high school, 4 hours a week. You should be sitting at the piano, working at the piano, not. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Donna. We've
You're
come at the end of our
welcome.
time.
Yeah,
And
and
show
then
our
some.
appreciation.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I just wanted to bring up a